Welcome everybody to the next episode with the Legacy Wealth Capital Group. I got my partners Sean and Kyle here. How you guys feeling today?
Great,
Good, good,
great,
outstanding, outstanding.
pretty good.
Very good. I was just talking to my partners about, hairlines, getting older, Beijing from the barbers, and all the changes that you go through in life. But just like life changes, business changes as well. Where you start out in your business is not necessarily where that business, and it shouldn't be where that business is going to end up. You start out as a startup, as a solo founder, as a passionate individual who finds something that they love. But then your business begins to grow, it begins to scale. And eventually you make a decision on whether or not you want to continue to grow that business, take that business public, acquire other companies, sell, and you just have a lot of choices. But what I want to talk about today is more of the discussion on going public and what that really means. Because every day I'm having conversations with business owners, and that's not a part of the topic. That's not even something that they really understand. And they see publicly traded companies, they know what the stock market is, but I don't think they really understand what it means for their business to go public. So, Sean, Kyle, you guys took a company public. I want you guys to take us back. Take us back to before the company was public, that stage of where you're working, you have the business, and then you had the thought or the idea to go public. I want to know where that came from, and then just take us through the journey as we walk through there. And anytime you guys want to pause, I got dozens of questions to ask you, but just start us with what gave you the audacity to think that you could take a company public?
Mhm. Yeah, well, we were actually doing venture capital, and so basically, and just for everybody out there that might be novice, for those of you that are not aware of it, you don't have to be licensed to sell stock. Now, don't get me wrong when I say this. If you are, basically like a registered, RIA registered, real estate, registered investment advisor. If you're a broker dealer, you have to be licensed to sell other people's stock, but you can sell your own stock. So once we learned that game, about, hold on, wait a minute, we could sell stock in our own company. And what we were doing is we were using a financial instrument, but we were doing it for other companies. So think about it. You raise money for a company for about 6 months or so, and the next thing you know, all of a sudden the CEO gets a wild hair up his butt or whatever, and all of a sudden now we off that project, and then we had another project. So we were always going from project to project, and I was like, man, we should be smart enough to do this ourselves, right? What do we need? What do we need to do this? And we just needed a major agreement with the company. And so what happened is that, well, if we can get a major agreement with the company, we can start raising capital. And we raise our own capital and take that agreement and we can rock and roll with it. And then the sky was the limit from there.
Now,
Yeah,
when you say, oh, go for
but
it.
no, I was just going to say, you I agree 100% what Cal is saying, right? I think for me, I just wanted to be different than all the other businesses that's out there. Majority of the businesses that we speak and we look at, they're private companies. But going public truly sets you apart. From those private companies. So I wanted to be different.
Now, Kyle, when you talk about having the realization of getting an agreement with a company or a solution or something that will help accelerate that, where does that come from? Like, if I'm a new business today, am I looking for a company to help me, a agreement, or can I walk through this journey with my product, my business, my service?
That's a really good question because I think nowadays, so you got to understand, back then, there was no, again, social media. There was no Facebook. There was no Instagram. There was no LinkedIn. There was no even MySpace during that time. The web wasn't even really getting going. It was just really getting started. So, back then it was the dot, we were right around the dot com boom. So if you think about back then, some of you guys that are young, whatever, you don't even know what that is, but dot com companies were starting up, they were nothing. You know what I mean? And they were, raising capital. I mean, everybody was like, Steve Jobs out of their garage. So one of the things that, we were, I mean, we was in the hood. We ain't had no garage. So we needed something a little bit more that people can carry their weight with. And what's better than signing with the company? And see, we knew the biggest thing about raising capital was press releases. You got to understand, you got to have that sizzle. I talk about it all the time. You got to have that sizzle. So, what's the best way to get sizzle? Sign an agreement with somebody that's bigger than us, and then now they're bigger than us. Now, and you white label it or whatever. Now you go out and you go raise. But again, when you got that game plan and the investors, what do they want? Can we get an ROI? Can we get? And our thing was, hey, can we get you better than 6% return? Okay, well, that was better than the bank. They were doing CDs and things like that. So we were on our way.
Before you go deeper, I want to go back to that because I think that's what's missing. And I'm not saying that every company needs a 30-page, 40-page business plan, but we talked about this a little bit or in really in depth last night, that the pitch deck and the vision and the journey. And I like what you just said, Kyle, because I don't think I've heard you say this before in this conversation or this story. You identify what the investor was getting at the moment in time. They're getting 6% on their money dealing with bank savings or CDs or whatever investment they had at the point. So you had a benchmark that you were looking at and you were saying, okay, if we can get you more than this return, come over on our side. For you, why why did you even go that route? Why did you think about it? Like I'm trying to figure out because what I'm seeing is it's a mindset thing. It is a just a literal like yesterday I was having a conversation with a lady and I was asking her, okay, what's the low hanging fruit to generate revenue in your business? And why are you not going after that? Sometimes we just have mental blocks. How do we get out of the mental block to even recognize the opportunity that's in front of us?
Yeah, it's little bitty things. And again, I always say, the good book says, faith without works is dead. So you can have all the belief in the world that you want, but if you're not putting yourself in conversations, or if you're not putting yourself in position to basically see further, do other things, come out of your comfort zone. And what I did was I got a chance, we were already raising capital, but I got a chance to read a book. And the book was called Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun by Reginald Lewis. And reading that book showed me that he was just like me. He was out there working for people. He was raising capital, but he said, hold on, wait a minute. These people know better than me. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, they're not even smarter than me. And I think most of the time we think that people are better than us. They just have an opportunity. They just went through a different door. For us, Sean and I, we came through the back door. We didn't go to Harvard Business School. We didn't go to Wharton School of Business. We got backdoored in and we got taught by some Jewish people. And, you had to be a player to stay there because if not, I mean, they were going to embarrass you. So we wasn't coming up in there getting embarrassed every day. And I believe that was it. That's probably that little edge that you're talking about. And we were afraid I be honest with you, not to succeed. We had to succeed. You know what I mean? When you're around that group of people and we were posting checks or whatever. Yo, I got 5 grand this week. Yo, I got 6 grand. I mean, Sean's brother one time, we went to the bank and he cashed a check. It was $10,000. I'm like, look, man, take some of the money, put it in the bank. He said, no, no. And I'm trying to tell you, have you ever been to the bank and you got a check so big that they had to go get the money and pull it out of the plastic bag? See, when you see things like that, life ain't the same no more. And then after they broke the bag open and cashed the check, they basically gave me my portion. They gave my other partner his portion. And then after that, they gave Sean's brother his portion. And then he said, oh, can I have the bag? And then they gave him the plastic bag back. And he put the money back in the bag and left. So that's what you got to experience. And I mean, to see that and witness it, I was gone from then. There was no way I was going back to a job. I just over broke. journey on the brokenness, jumping
Yep.
out of bed.
Oh, you got acronyms for days for that.
I
Oh
mean,
yeah, yeah,
we talk about mental blocks and stuff like that. I think, you got to have good surroundings, good partners, good or good a good team or good advisors. Good mentors. To get you over those mental blocks. Because sometimes, I mean, everybody goes through them. Everybody is not feeling the best every day, right? And sometimes your mind is distracted. So that it helps when you have partners or advisors or people who you can talk to, like mentors and etc.
Okay.
you got
Yeah.
it. You got to get stretched. Your mind. Einstein said, whatever the mind can conceive, it will achieve.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? So you got to get stretched, and the mind will never go back to its original state.
Unless you don't use it. And then it's
Exactly.
going to go through entropy and shrink. And it's pretty much you go just brain dead if you don't use it at all. Okay. So now you got your mind made up. You want to
Yeah.
know, or now you know that you can do something that you've seen other people do and you want to do it for yourself. As you started the journey of thinking about going public and raising the capital, take us through just some of that in the business. Because I know it's a lot and it's years of work. But if you can take it and shrink it down to maybe 4 or 5 key things along the journey. I know you talked about the partnership. How did you search for the partnership? How did the agreement come into together? Why did you choose the industry? Tell us about the industry. And then what started to happen from there?
Well, I'll tackle how did we choose the industry. So when Cal and them, they first started with a network marketing company, right? So Juice Marketing, which is JMI, was pretty much network marketing. And Cal's always been, you know, a networking guy. He's always been a guy that's, been in those circles and stuff. So, but they were selling a telephone service, right? And basically, I said, well, why not? Why not? Let's find our own instead of reselling somebody else's stuff. Let's do our own. And we're the type of people that we don't like reselling, so to speak, right? We look at it, we say, man, that's pretty successful. Let's create our own. So that's how, we basically started off as resellers and we went on and signed contracts to create our own.
Yeah. And surrounding ourselves with again, being in that industry, we knew the SEC attorneys. Um, you know, and we watched the people that we were working with, who they were working with. So the thing about that industry, when you see who they're working with, all right, well, hey, give them a call, go get the card, and when you get that opportunity, when that door is open, don't blow it. So we went through that door, and we were like, hey, look, we starting our own. We can do this. They're like, okay. And guess what? The price didn't change. They didn't give us a homeboy hookup. So,
Yeah.
we had to go in there. We had to make the payment. So now you in the big boy shoes. So once you go in there, and now all of a sudden, guess what? Now it's swim or flight, right? So basically, so we had to go in there and step up our game up. But now now we got the deals. So now that we got the deals, okay, now we know we can get on the phone. Now we get on the phone, we can present, but we've got something backing us. And the key was, all right, how much does this attorney cost? That was the motivating factor. All right, well, to get this attorney, just to have that retainer, it's 5 grand a month. Okay, well, what's the cost for Regulation D 504 in 2003? All right, well, that's going to be $25,000. Okay, and that's just the right to basically be able to raise capital. Yeah, all right, well, that's what we got to do. Let's go get it. And so again, for Sean and I, there was, no is not an option. All of us are prior military, so you guys know when we go overseas or whatever, there ain't no not coming home. you know, there's no we're not going to get it fixed. I was a jet mechanic. There was no way in the world you're gonna tell me I ain't gonna fix that engine. I don't care what happened, bird strike, whatever, something's in it, rock, whatever. This engine's getting fixed. So with that kind of mentality brought to this type of business, I think whatever those people went through, the Wharton School of Business or Harvard School or Yale School of Business, whatever, MIT, we got that same type of, I want to say that through the military.
Yeah.
We just took that grunt and brought it to the business.
That's good. And I like what you said there because, and if you guys are listening, I want you to pick up on the small things that are being said here, like the mentality, the seeing someone else do it and knowing and believing you can do it, the surrounding yourself with the right mentors and right people and right environment. But now also setting the target. Again, Kyle talked about for the investor side, if they're getting 6%, let me set a target and articulate that target to them so I can win them over. But now he also said from the business expense side, recognizing what the targets are. If you know it costs 5K a month for the attorney, if the or the documentation, the financial instrument costs you 25K, now you know what to shoot for. A lot of business owners just want to make more money, but they don't have a why attached to that. There's no significant thing that they can point to, a North Star to say, hey, look, my monthly recurring expenses are X amount. Let me go get enough contracts, enough clients, enough whatever deals in the pipeline to at least meet that number. And then let me set a profit goal and meet that number. Most businesses are just out here hustling, going dollar for dollar, but they don't even know where that money goes, how to allocate that money. And as Kevin O'Leary says, they don't know how to deploy that money out for it to bring friends back with it and multiply. So if you're
Yeah.
listening, make sure you're taking notes on the fine things behind running a business, growing a business, scaling a business that really makes you successful. And targeting is one of those things. Setting the targets to know where you're going and then attaching a why to it. Sean wants to be different. He wants to, hey, if they can do it, we can do it. So the why is then attached to the target, and that what creates what we call an action plan. I think
Yeah.
people have a plan now, but they don't have action. So they've
Right.
dropped the word action plan and they just have plan. So a lot of hopes, dreams, ideas, thoughts, but nothing executing or moving them towards that plan. Sean, you want to jump in there?
Yeah. Yeah. I think too, what's the goal of every business owner, right? Is to grow a large business, right? But do you know how hard it is to grow your business, to grow it like to $1 billion, $10 billion business or $100 million business with just your capital? Do you know how hard it is? I'm selling a product, and how many times I got to sell this product in order to get my revenues up to 10 million, right? But if I can use other people's money to build up my business enough to where I'm producing 100 million or at least 50 million or whatever in sales, right? And I don't got to pay that money back. Why not go public? Why not? Let's not even talk about 100 million. Let's talk about 50 million, or let's talk about 20 million. If I can take, $1 million or $5 million, whatever, and I can make that $5 million turn into 20, and I don't got to pay that money back, why not? I don't have that type of money. I'm not going to be able to go to Bank of America and get $5 million. Why not ask investors to do it if they say, yeah, I'll hold on, I'll wait until you go public, because you don't control the public market. You don't control that. You don't put no money into that or anything. So why not? The money's basically, you just taking it, you're putting it to work, you're growing your company, something you're going to do anyway, but you're using other people's money to do it instead of your own.
And I'll add just a real little simple basic thing, because that Sean was talking, I'm just thinking, take somebody, and again, don't get me wrong when I say this, but take somebody that has a print shop. So what would they do? They would raise money to go get what? A machine
Mm-hmm.
that could help them produce what? More shirts, right? Or things like that. Well, what we did was we got not a machine, we got a financial instrument. And that was the thinking. We got a financial instrument for that person that's going out there that's going to get a machine to help them do more shirts. We got an instrument to help us raise more money. And I believe that people don't get that. They don't think about instruments to help them raise. They'll buy equipment. You know what I'm saying? That's the depreciating asset. You know what I mean? If that thing breaks down, whatever, you got to get it fixed. So the only thing they're thinking about is that piece of equipment that can help them do what they need to get done. But they don't think for Sean and I, that equipment was a financial instrument and it was an intangible. So people couldn't put their hands on it. They couldn't see it. But that's what it was for us. And what did that do for us? It opened up every other thing. If we needed that piece of equipment, that instrument could help us get that equipment. If we needed that employee, that instrument could help us get that key individual to work for us. If we needed that office space or we wanted to expand, that financial instrument could get everything for us. Everything we needed was in that financial instrument.
That's good. And as you're listening, when he's talking about the financial instrument, you have to have legal documentation that's filed and registered to say that you can raise capital. You can't just go out there getting money from investors without these documents in place. And so in our class, Capital Raising Academy, we talked through each of the financial instruments, their benefits, their how much capital you can raise over what amount of time, whether you can raise from accredited and non-accredited investors. So you definitely need to learn more about these instruments because to Kyle's point, a lot of people raise money just to get the next thing. They do it to get inventory. They do it to get supplies. They do it to just get the next thing because they think if I have the next thing, I can make more money. And then through making more money, I can bootstrap my way through. But you still run the limitation because there's only so much work you can do. And on all the panels I sit on with business owners, they always talk about being capital strapped. I don't have enough money to hire good people. I don't have enough money to launch the next store. But nobody ever says, can I raise capital? They will say, well, my credit is shot, so I can't go to the bank. Or I need to
Yeah.
go through this financial course, this class, so I can improve my credit, so I can go get money from a lender. Or I can try to take a CFDI or some sort of smart, if am I in an opportunity zone? They try to find free money
Yeah.
instead of going the route of raising money that they can do year over year over year over year. So I want to dive into that because that segues us into now you have the idea, you know the targets, the benchmarks. When you first started raising capital, what was that process? You paid the 25,000 to get the financial instrument to do it. Then what?
Well, we went to our boys. We went to our boys that was working with other firms and we're like, yo, hey, come on over here. What are they paying you? All right, great. Hey, we'll give you this. So again, you got to pull the best talent. So guess what? So you got to give up more. So we knew not only by giving up a little bit more that we could bring them over, but also we knew the power of it. I mean, they were over here working with these other firms, and when we show them, look, you're over here working with this firm. What you getting out of it? All you doing is getting your weekly paycheck or whatever. But what are you getting? So come over here with us, and hey, look, well, not only are we going to give you that, but look at what we're doing. We're going to take this company public. And so they knew, but now that lets Sean and I focus on getting the public stuff done, getting the paperwork right, getting the attorneys right, while we had a team basically raising capital for us. And what were they selling? They were selling our shares.
Yeah.
Hmm. And talk us through that process a little bit. Talk us through getting the paperwork right because now you're on the way to going public. What business foundation did you have for that? What are the attorneys looking for? What is the SEC looking for in order to go public? What is it that you have to have in place and get together?
Right. Good question.
Yeah. So, obviously business plan, you got to have, your shares properly allocated because, a lot of times what people do is they'll go and you got to have a C corp first of all, right? But they'll go and get a C corp, issue themselves 1,000 shares, right? You can't raise capital with 1,000 shares, right? So you got a proper, uh, do your corporate resolutions or whatever and issue out the amount of shares that your company represents, the proper amount. So like we're doing a bill, like I'll give you like an example, like we're going to do a raise. We have 1 billion shares authorized. Now that doesn't mean we're going to sell 1 billion. We might sell 10% of 20 or 20% total of that billion, right? But that 20% will provide us with enough money in order to raise the capital we need to move the company forward for years, not 1 month, 1 week to buy a product. for years, right? So that's kind of like the game plan, and that all of that is based on what you're looking at doing as far as with the company. So that first is the structure as far as the business plan. You got to get a sound business plan together. You got to know where you're going. You got to have, what you're going to do this year all the way up to 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and your end goal in mind. And then, you want to base the shares on your company, whether you start off or your valuation starts off at 20 cents, 50 cents, a dollar, whatever, then, you got to do the math to where it all makes sense as far as with your different raises and stuff.
Yeah, and one thing too, and again, I'm telling you, exposure is everything. You know, when I talked to you before about we knew the attorneys that the guys that we were working for, who they had, so we could go to the attorney's office. So I remember being in the office, and I don't remember this showing, but I Carmine Buer, I believe,
Carmine,
right, Carmine. Okay, this is an SEC attorney, and he had a shelf like behind me, right, and behind you, Tyrus,
Hmm.
and the shelf was all of these folders, but they weren't folders like a thin folder. They were like this. And what happens is when we as a people and we go, like Sean said, become a C corp, we get? We only get the paperwork and just a little bit of stuff so you can get the EIN number so you can open up your bank. Now they say, oh, with just an extra $125, you'll get this corporate book or whatever. Oh no, I ain't paying the extra 125. So we don't pay that
Yeah.
extra 125. And guess what? Those those things that I saw, all of those that were in his office for rows. I'm talking about rows. That's when I realized, what is that? Why are all those back there? And he said, oh, well, these are corporations. And they were rows of corporations. And it was the extra box that Sean's talking about because what's inside there? The seal, the company seal, and the stock certificates.
mm-hmm.
So that's what opened up our mind to say, hold on, wait a minute. Why does this guy have all of these rows and rows? And I'm looking at 125, 125, 125, 125, 125, 125. And he did it for every corporation. Now, I bet you we can go out right now and we could talk to all of our friends and say, oh, you got your corporation, right? Yeah. Did you pay the extra 125? For what?
Yeah.
That
Nope.
right there is the problem.
Yeah. No corporate resolution docs, no bylaws,
No certificates.
no
And remember,
certificates.
there's only about 10 or 15 in there. That's just to get you started.
Yeah.
Okay? Now you got to order them all the time from a transfer agent. But you ain't even opened up, you ain't even in the game because you haven't even got your first 15 certificates. You already start with one foot in the hole.
So now we have sort of the foundation. You got the team, they're raising capital, they're talking to investors every day. What are they telling them? What about JMI Telecom? What are they telling them that brought the investors over that allowed you guys to raise the capital that you raised?
We always talk about the sizzle, right? We always talking about, something, you got to have something in your company or present your company, make it marketable to investors. So that's what they talk about. They say, they talk about what this company is looking at, what they're doing right now, and what they're looking at doing in the future. And investors decide on that phone call whether or not they like it, the product, and if the exit strategy is okay with them. So they was all, okay with the exit strategy because whether the exit strategy is in 24 months, 12 months, or 36 months, or whenever, right? The best ways to make money, right? The best ways is through investments, is through stocks. That's where the greatest wealth is accumulated at. If you guys look at the market, they said something like $20 trillion was lost or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
right? $20 trillion was just lost in a day or so, a week. The greatest ways to make money is in the investment in the stock market. So now I have my shares and I'm selling my shares, right? Excuse me, I'm selling the company shares, treasury shares. I have my personal shares. The investors is looking at it like, okay, well, if I can buy this at 20 cents, right? First shares, initial ground floor opportunity. If I can buy this at 20 cents and this thing can at least go to, I don't know, $5, right? How much money can I make off of that?
Hmm.
I think I could do pretty well. I think this company can at least do $5, right? I'm getting in at 20 cents. I think it can at least do $5. What they're looking, if I compare it to the closest company to them is $25. This company should be able to at least make $5. So that's what investors look at. The
I think that's
sizzle,
good.
the beginning, what you're doing now, what you're looking at doing in the future, where is the shares being sold at? Because we're not publicly traded yet, right? So it's shares.
Hmm.
And when it goes public, if they're able to accomplish everything they're looking at accomplish, can it make at least $5 or $3 or whatever that magical number the investor have? And how much money would I make off of that?
That's another thing to pay attention to. Sean said, looking at the company that's closest to you, that's publicly traded, and seeing
Yep,
where they are,
yep.
and can you get there?
We used to have a saying, Mr. Investor, this is ground floor opportunity. How much further can you fall? Right? And I'm saying this is the initial sale of the shares. Everybody had an initial. Microsoft and Amazon wasn't selling at $200.
Right.
Everybody had an initial. So
Like we looked at Newsmax. Newsmax just IPO'd last month. They sold, I don't know if they sold their initial shares, but it says at $10. They IPO'd at $14, meaning everybody that bought initially at 10, now you can sell at 14. You made $4 per share that you owned.
yeah,
Then it went to $200 plus before it dropped back to 20-ish dollars. So if
right,
you got in at $10 and you held through the up and the drop, you doubled your money.
right. But that's not where the initial shares that were where the initial investors bought the shares at, right? That was, for example, if you do a Regulation
You're
A, right?
right.
You
Okay,
have a
before you go
crowdfunding.
in there, hold on. Before you
Okay,
go there,
all right,
break
okay.
that down for us because you're right. I'm
Yeah.
thinking that the initial shares were at the $10 mark, but that's the IPO
No, that's the
price.
IPO price. Yeah.
So
So
take us through the journey.
So basically, like I'll give you an example, right? So we do crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is usually the seed capital. Seed capital is usually the beginning capital of a company. And it's equivalent to people going to the bank, getting a bank loan, right? And starting the business up. They may go get $5,000 and I'll start the business, right? But with the seed capital, you can go with the crowdfunding, you can go up to 5 million, right? So that's the least expensive you'll ever sell your shares unless your valuation goes down, right? So let's say it opens, you sell your shares at 50 cents, right? So now you can only go up to 5 million, so you're selling 10 million shares. But now let's say with the 5 million, you grow a little bit, you buy some things that produce revenues. Now you're doing okay, right? But you want to do another raise. That second raise, instead of being at 50 cents, it might be at $1, maybe $2, right? And then let's say you want to do another raise, right? The next raise may be at $1, $3, or whatever, $5. And then you go and do your IPO, right? Now you don't need to have 3 raises or anything. It could be how many raises you want to have. You can have 10 raises, 20 raises, and then do an IPO. But your IPO price is what the price that the market makers, the lawyers, and everybody value your shares at. So now you're selling the shares at $10, and when it goes public, that first trade, right, is where the people is buying the shares at. So now the
Hmm.
people is buying the shares at $10. So they bought the shares at $10, hoping that it would go up to 20 when it opens to the market. And unfortunately, it went to 14. You say
Yeah, it went from 10 to 14.
right,
Over the next couple of days, it hit 200.
right. So those people that came in at 14, they bought it from the people at 10. They watched the stock go up to 200 and something dollars, but there was people still in at 50
50
cents.
cent.
Exactly.
Right. That's the reason why Sean and I we talk to people and they be, oh, well, are you doing forex or anything like that? And we're like, what? Like, why would we invest in forex? We create that.
Yeah.
We create that. Our thinking is not go ahead and invest in forex or go and invest in other companies. We create the companies, and I believe that's probably why a lot of people have a hard time understanding, because they say you just grasped that we created before the $10. The IPO is the
Hmm.
$10. That's the initial public. That's when it gets open to the offering to the public.
Exactly.
But
Yep.
we created down here at 45 cents, at 15 cents. See, folks are not going to realize that at one time, Bank of America was 50 cents. People don't realize at one time, Amazon was maybe 35 cents or whatever. Those people that got on board. There's a group of people right now that gave, Jeff Bezos, a group of 20 people gave him $1 million. Well, you know how much that $1 million is worth right
It
now?
was 50 people, I thought. Wasn't it
50
50?
people. Oh, 50. Okay, 50
50
people.
gave him
Yeah,
20,000.
20,000 apiece, right? So
Yeah.
50 people gave him 20,000. Well, guess what? You know how much that worth that group of people right now? You know what that amount is worth? 200 billion. So what do you think they got that stock at?
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
50 cents, 75 cents, because he needed $1 million.
Right.
So he got $1 million. Probably gave it to him at 35
They
cents.
had 30% of the company.
Yeah,
Yep. 30% of the
but
company.
that's just a group. So now, just that group on $1 million. $1 million. But now everybody else is buying it at 200 or whatever. But the
Right.
wealth was made right there.
Yeah. I met a
That's what we're
gentleman.
trying to teach people.
Sorry about that, Cal. Sorry.
No, go ahead, go
I
ahead.
met a gentleman who had 187 shares, 187,000 shares of IBM. He didn't buy, he bought it before it went public. I remember looking at IBM and I'm like, man, like you bought it before all the splits. He said, yeah, I bought it. It was like, it was real cheap when he bought IBM because he bought it when it was pre-seed
Hmm.
or seed raising, seed capital raising, you know.
So, for the audiences listening, especially you business owners, you have really two ways to look at this. You have to look at it from both sides. You have to look at it from the side of raising the capital is going to help your business grow. It's going to give you the fuel that you need to take off and go further. But then also, if you make the decision to go public, all of those people, including yourself, because as Sean mentioned, you're selling shares from the company, but you also have your shares. Those are going to be valued as well when you hit the public market. And so when we talk about overnight millionaires, it doesn't mean that they woke up and they became a millionaire. It was over the years of raising capital, positioning the company, going through the process, getting set up, and then when they get IPO'd, once it hit the public
They became
market,
instantly millionaires.
now you're an instant overnight millionaire.
Yeah.
And for
Because
some, billionaires.
because the thing about it is, Tyrus, if you look at it like this, right? That IPO opened up at the IPO price was at $10, right? What did the owners get the stock at or the shares? How much did they pay for it? Ballpark.
The
Roughly.
owners themselves?
Yeah, maybe $100 if they
Yeah.
paid that, right? And they probably had 20 million shares, 30 million shares.
Yeah, see that's the part that people don't get. When you set this up, you set yourself up so that you own a percentage of the company. Well, that percentage of the company is based off of how many shares that you own. So when we sit down and talk, people say, "Oh, well, I authorize 1 million shares." We scratch your head like, "What? Like, who are you talking to? Who said this to you? Where'd you get that from? Google University?"
Yeah,
Because that's not right. You should be issuing yourself millions of shares.
Yeah.
People saw,
Especially right if you are the leaders of your company. You can't issue yourself no 500 shares and then call yourself a leader because, and then when an investor buys a share, he might buy if he buy 1,000 shares, his shares is he's more he got
you know,
more interest than you, more percentage than you.
right?
Yeah.
You got to put your shares out so that nobody can. If somebody comes in and says, "Okay, well, I want 20 million shares," well, I mean, now they're going to be close to you. But ain't nobody coming in to say that. So that's why you got it. But we tell people, what's your $1 billion idea? Set them shares up. We had 22 million shares. So, think about it. So, I mean, I think the person that had the most shares in our company might have had, what, I don't know, 2 million shares or 3 million shares. But they didn't have no 22 million.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, well, as we wind this down, I want you guys to give us your final thoughts, and include a something to stay away from.
Yeah.
Final thoughts with something that you stay away from, and I'm gonna go ahead and give mine now. What I want you guys to do is, if you want to learn more about how Sean and Kyle took that company public, learn really that whole process. I want you to go to webinar.capitalraisingacademy.com. You see it scrolling across the bottom of your screen, and there's a whole webinar on how Sean and Kyle took their company public, what they sold their shares for in the beginning when they were raising capital, what the shares became worth, how many shares they own, with the document showing and proving it. Because a lot of people tell you these things and you don't know whether is it really true or not. But Kyle is one of those people that kept the stock certificates. So he has it, and it shows the numbers and it shows the registration, the stamps, the approvals. So it's real. So go to webinar.capitalraisingacademy.com, watch the webinar, learn more, get even deeper. And now I turn it over to Sean and Kyle for their final thoughts and their one thing to stay away from.
Yeah, I'll let Cal close us out. But I would say stay away from. It's two things, right? Stay away from stock manipulators, people who say what they can do all this stuff with your shares and boost up your stock price or whatever. Stay away from them. Always go with market makers and things like that, people who are licensed. And the second thing is guard your shares, right? Your shares is value. Don't don't just discriminately or undiscriminately just give your shares to anyone, right? Because your shares is worth something. It's little pieces of your company, each share, right? I would say this, right? Again, being publicly traded, it puts you in a different category, right? It puts you on another level, right? If you want to stand out more, have a publicly traded company. If you want to get wealthy, not just rich, but wealthy, the best ways to do it is to raise capital. Well, let me back up. The best ways to do it is to, on paper, write down your $1 billion idea, right? Whatever it is, expand it across the country and then across the world. Raise the capital for it and then go public. And, most of the time, a lot of time, you will become wealthy.
Yeah, I'd say stay away from greedy people. All right. In this game, there's no room for greedy people. All right. They always end
Yeah.
up on my favorite television show. You guys know my favorite television show, American Greed. Greedy people, stay away from them. Um, Stay away from, I want to say shark mongers. Okay, people that are just swimming in the waters, looking and waiting because there's sharks.
We'll
You
take
got to
advantage of
know,
it.
yeah, they are going to try to take advantage of you. Get legal counsel. All right, and make sure you're doing something. Somebody says, "Oh, hey man, look, I got this." I remember I had investors used to call me up. What's happening? What's coming down the pike? Well, what you got? Look, you're gonna have to call legal to talk about that. You know what I mean? Don't be out there blabbing off at your mouth and everything you're doing because remember,
Okay.
you're the president, CEO, CFO. If you heard of insider trading, okay,
Yep.
that's what that is. That's why Martha Stewart went to jail and got her street cred. Okay, so when you're dealing in this game, you got to be careful. Everything you do, hey, look, if you want to hear what I'm talking about, make sure you're on my email list or check out our press releases. But other than that, those are the key things. That's how you talk in the press with your press releases. Don't be talking, quiet backdoor deals or anything like that. That's being greedy, trying to get ahead. Somebody's paying a little bit extra on the side. That's not going to work. You're going to end up in trouble. So those are my kind of catchaways and stayaways. But I would say this to you: it's a beautiful thing. Be read up on it because there are some smart people. So don't think you're the smartest. Always make sure you can continue to learn, and always learn the intricacies and all the rules changing and everything. Be a part of it, and pay, pay for good people to be surrounded with. Okay, that's the key. We always made sure we had the attorneys, we had everybody we did, and we paid, what it cost. Because guess what? That CYA that protected us. So those would be my things. But one thing is this: if you start a business, um, what's the end goal? I mean, the end goal is right. I mean, whoever dies with the most toys and the most property wins, right? That's it, right? So I mean, go for the gusto. Don't get in here just to create another job. Get in here and work and grow it, stretch. Stretch yourself. Go beyond. I mean, how far can you take it? And that's what our goal was, and that's what we're continuing to do now. I think it keeps you alive. I think it keeps you vibrant. You
Yeah.
know, muscle memory.
Everything is
All
possible when
right.
you're raising capital.
All right. You heard it, guys, today from two that did it, not two that dreamed it. And so make sure you check us out at webinar.capitalraisingacademy.com. Go a little bit deeper. Keep tuning in. We'll see you next week at the same time. Thank you for joining us and hope you have a great one.